There's a woman buried in a Tuscan villa graveyard, whose grave nobody bothered to make public. That's fitting, actually, because almost nothing written about Marie Boozer during her lifetime, or for the 90 years after it, was entirely true either. She was called the most beautiful woman in the Confederacy, but she was also called a traitor, a gold digger, a Russian jewel thief, a courtesan, and even a murder victim, according to one newspaper that had to retract the story 2 days later because, whoops, she wasn't actually dead. By the time she died a countess in 1908, Marie Boozer had been reinvented so many times by so many strangers that the real story, the one she actually lived, got buried under all of it. This is that real story, and it starts like a lot of good scandals do, with a complicated family background. Marie Boozer was born in December 1846 in Columbia, South Carolina, though even her birth year was mangled by later biographers. Her mother, Amelia Sees, was a Philadelphia constable's daughter who had, by that point, already survived one marriage to a dying man she wed purely out of pity. Her gravely ill husband had died the next day. Her second husband, Peter Burton, was an older South Carolina businessman who dropped dead of a seizure while Amelia was pregnant with Marie. Husband number 3, David Boozer, is the one who gave Marie her surname. Tragically, he died by his own hand in 1850, while Amelia was at church. With his passing, Amelia had now buried 3 husbands. David had left behind an estate worth more than $10,000, over $400,000 today, placing Amelia and young Marie in a far more comfortable financial position. Yet Columbia's high society never quite let Amelia in. She was gossiped about constantly, and she worked as a seamstress, which was practically social death in the antebellum South. But Marie herself was undeniable. Strawberry blonde hair, deep blue eyes, and by every account, even the catty ones, genuinely stunning. General John Preston once said she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever laid eyes on. Mary Chestnut, the Civil War's most famous diarist, and no fan of the Boozers, admitted grudgingly that she was a beauty that none can deny. She was also nothing like the delicate Magnolia stereotype. After her mother remarried Jacob Feaster in 1852, Marie grew up in a comfortable household, and her devoted stepfather ensured she received an excellent education. In 1863, she was sent to study in Paris, where she fell in love with the French culture. She even came home calling herself Marie instead of Mary, simply because she liked it better. She then returned to Columbia cultured, confident, and entirely her own person. She rode horses, shot firearms, and cared little for society's expectations. Then the war found her, and handed her the love story that would define everything that came after. For the first few years of the war, Marie was, on paper, a good Confederate daughter. She nursed wounded soldiers at a Columbia hospital and did her part for morale. But her mother had a different set of loyalties, secretly aiding Union prisoners held at Camp Sorgan outside the city. And it was through that work that Marie met a man who'd change everything. His name was Samuel W. Preston. He was a Union naval lieutenant who had been captured and held as a prisoner of war right there in Columbia. While helping tend to prisoners, Marie met the dashing young man, and the two fell deeply in love. Such was their love, they made plans to marry as soon as he got out of the army. For a brief moment, the future seemed certain. Yet that future didn't make it out of the war. Samuel was released in a prisoner exchange, returned to the fight, and sadly was killed at Fort Fisher in January 1865. When the news reached Marie, something inside her shifted permanently. Whatever was left of her Confederate loyalty went with him. She was now fully her mother's daughter. Now she was in it for the Union, all the way. A month later, William T. Sherman and his Union army marched into Columbia. Within days, a third of the city was gone, burned in fires nobody has ever fully sorted out the blame for. Sherman insisted the retreating Confederates started them. Confederate General Wade Hampton insisted Sherman did. In reality, it was likely drunk soldiers, loose cotton, and high winds spreading the flames. But while the city smoldered, Marie and her mother were doing something that would have gotten most Columbia families ran out of the town on principle alone. They were hiding escaped Union prisoners in their cellar, feeding and sheltering them until Union lines reached them. One local man caught doing the same was whipped and had his head shaved for it. Fortunately, Marie and Amelia weren't caught. By then, they had earned the gratitude of Union officers, and that gratitude offered a measure of protection. But Columbia would soon notice what they did, and its people would not forget. Amelia knew the math. Stay and they'd be marked women in a city that had just watched them help the enemy. So when Sherman's army moved out, she packed up Marie, her half-sister Ethelind, and their nurse, and they left with the Union column. Not trailing behind it either. General Oliver Howard arranged a proper carriage for them and kept them near his own staff, because he knew exactly how rough the roads north were about to get. This is the part of the story where the legend takes over from the facts, so let's set the record straight. For decades, popular histories love to claim that Marie was caught in a Confederate cavalry raid on Union General Judson Kilpatrick's camp, supposedly fleeing half-dressed into the woods, while Kilpatrick himself ran off in his shirt and drawers. It's genuinely a great scene. It's also fiction. The earliest account of that raid, from 1899, names the woman involved as an older Vermont schoolteacher, not Bowser. Somewhere between 1899 and a widely read 1956 history of the campaign, storytellers swapped the old schoolteacher for a beautiful 20-year-old because that made for a far better tale. Every serious historian who has gone back to the primary sources since agrees Marie was nowhere near that camp. Her real journey was dramatic enough on its own, without a made-up love story bolted onto it. By March 1865, they'd reach Wilmington, then Philadelphia, and finally New York. And the North didn't see traitors arriving, it saw heroines. The Union League Club handed the family $10,000 to help them resettle. More than 30 Union officers signed statements praising their courage. Sherman himself gave them a warm mention in his memoirs. For most people, that would have been the end of an extraordinary story. But for Marie, it was only the beginning. $10,000 was serious money in 1865, and combined with whatever resources Amelia had managed to preserve, it brought entry into rooms a seamstress's daughter from Columbia had no business entering. As it turned out, New York society cared less about where you'd come from than what you could bring to the room. Marie brought plenty. Beautiful, fluent in French, and sharp enough to read a room instantly, she wore her new life flawlessly. Amelia had just one ambition left, and she pursued it relentlessly: to marry Marie well. She landed on John S. Beecher, a wealthy older merchant, in 1866. Marie's own description of him was blunt: a pleasant old man. It was of course not a love match, but rather a transaction dressed up in silk. In 1867, they had a son, and she named him Preston after Samuel, the man she'd actually wanted to marry, but never got the chance to. Then in 1870, Amelia died. For nearly 2 decades, she'd been Marie's fiercest advocate, social manager, and constant protector, smoothing over scandals, arranging introductions, and keeping her daughter's place in society secure. Suddenly, Marie was on her own. Beecher wasn't faithful either, and in a twist that borders on self-sabotage, he's the one who introduced Marie to Lloyd Phoenix, a wealthy yachtsman with a habit of promising marriage to women he had no intention of marrying. Marie, though, believed him completely, and she waited, and when she finally pressed him on it, he laughed at her. Whatever Marie did in response in October 1873, it was serious enough that everyone involved worked hard to bury it, and they largely succeeded. Beecher used the scandal to file for divorce anyway. The case dragged on until 1874, becoming entangled with a separate scandal in London involving Marie's half-sister, making headlines on both sides of the Atlantic. The ruling was harsh. Marie was named the adulterous party, while Beecher kept their son. She got alimony, and under New York law at the time, she couldn't remarry as long as he was alive. New York was now finished with her, but Paris hadn't even met her yet. Paris in the 1870s played by a different set of rules than New York. A divorced American woman with a scandalous reputation wasn't automatically cast out. She could even become an asset if she played her cards right. Marie played them perfectly. She rented rooms, filled them with the right people, and let the word spread. Within months, her apartment was pulling in artists, writers, minor royalty, and other notable figures. This was the demi-monde, the shadow society running parallel to respectable Paris, where charisma counted far more than reputation and connections counted far more than blood. Marie had both. She lived loud, expensive habits, a rebellious streak, and enough of a profile that Paris police reportedly kept half an eye on her, not because she'd committed any crime worth mentioning, but because women moving through those circles inevitably attracted official attention. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, before she'd even fully settled into the city, she and her sister Ethelane took a trip to St. Petersburg. There they mingled with Russian aristocrats, had their portraits taken by a fashionable court photographer, and became the center of attention. It should have been a footnote. Instead, it became the seed of a rumor that outlived the actual trip by decades. The rumor was explosive, that Marie had walked away with jewels belonging to the Russian imperial family. Unsurprisingly though, there was no truth to it. None. But once a story like that attached itself to your name, it never really lets go. And so Marie's biggest headlines were still ahead of her. In London in the autumn of 1875, she met the man who'd finally hand her something New York had never offered, a title gossip couldn't revoke. This was Count Arthur de Porteles-Gaugier. He was Swiss-born, working as a French diplomat, roughly her age, and by every account an actual gentleman, which after Beecher and Lloyd Phoenix must have felt almost suspicious. There was a strange small world wrinkle to it too. Arthur's late first wife had been Jenny Holliday, and Marie had known Jenny years earlier, back at the same convent school in Manhattan. Gilded Age circles were a remarkably small world after all. They married in a London church on November 4th, 1875. Marie was 28 years old. Arthur was 31. Because her divorce technically barred her from remarrying while Beecher was alive, they remarried again the following spring in Baltimore, this time with Beecher's own blessing, just to make the arrangement airtight under American law. 2 weddings for 1 marriage. That's how carefully Marie had to move, even as she finally stepped into the world she'd spent years fighting to reach. And just like that, the girl her own hometown had branded a traitor was now a countess. But while a title could change her status, it couldn't erase her past, and her infamy would only continue. Marie left her rebellious Paris years behind her and spent the next 3 decades as a faithful, well-travelling diplomatic wife. Her life after marriage reads less like a biography and more like a shipping manifest. Peking, Naples, a chateau in Switzerland, Santiago de Cuba, Buitenzorg on the island of Java, where she and Arthur happened to be stationed when Krakatoa erupted in 1883, Tokyo where they spent 4 years in the 1890s, and became by most accounts genuinely well liked. The French government eventually gave Arthur one of its highest honours, the Legion of Honour, and more than one source credits Marie's own social touch with helping him achieve it. But fame, once it attaches itself to you, doesn't care how far you run. It follows you, and sometimes it gets stranger with distance. Even years later, attacks came from figures like South Carolina journalist Julian Selby and other former Confederates who viewed Marie as someone who had betrayed the South. Newspapers back home circulated stories that she'd married the Ottoman Sultan. Others placed her in Africa, supposedly living among the Zulu. None of it was true. None of it was even close to the life she was actually living. Then, in October 1884, the New York Times ran a headline you don't forget. A young woman strangled with a bowstring in Japan, dead over some indiscretion. They named Marie. The only problem was, Marie hadn't set foot in Japan yet. Her actual posting there was still a decade off, and she was very much alive. 2 days later, the same paper printed a retraction. Alive and well in Switzerland, they admitted, as if that somehow erased what had already been published. It didn't. But not only that, the retraction ran on page 2. The murder had run on page 1. After decades of headlines, scandals and rumours, Marie's final chapter would be far quieter than the legend that followed her. She spent her final years in Italy, at a 25-room villa outside Florence with a clear view of the cathedral in the distance. After decades of packing for the next posting, always preparing for the next destination, she finally stopped moving. She received the last rites of the Catholic Church and died on January 25, 1908, at 61 years of age. Her husband would outlive her by 20 years. And here's where we land back where we started. Nobody ever made her burial site public, not the location, barely even the date. After a lifetime spent as raw material for other people's stories, the one detail she actually managed to keep for herself was where her body would rest. Everything else the papers took, the jewel theft that never happened, the murder that never happened, the nightgown scene at a cavalry camp she was never anywhere near. Decades of novelists building entire books of a bitter pamphlet written by a man who never forgave her for leaving Columbia in the first place. The real woman, the one who cared for wounded soldiers, fell for a man who died before they could marry, survived a brutal divorce, and rebuilt herself from a disgraced South Carolina exile into a countess who crossed the world, was buried beneath the legend. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Marie Boozer. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also let me know down below in the comments. Do you want more videos on socialites and people of this style, or would you like something else? Let me know. Also, I hope you guys have notifications turned on and are subscribed to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.